Hello, welcome to our online discussion of euthanasia, assisted suicide, and other end-of-life practices that affect people with disabilities for December 5th, 2014. My name is Amy Hasbrook, and I'm the director of Toujours Vivant-Not Dead Yet. We are a project of the Council of Canadians with Disabilities, and our goal is to inform, unify, and give voice to the disability rights opposition to assisted suicide, euthanasia, and other ending-of-life practices that have a discriminatory impact on people with disabilities. I want to welcome you to our weekly online discussion of these issues and more. Our position is pretty straightforward, but here are some of the main reasons that we have taken this position. First, legalizing assisted suicide is not necessary because people already have the option to refuse medical treatment and to have palliative care until the point of natural death. Secondly, we believe that these practices are discriminatory because while people without disabilities receive suicide prevention services, when they express a wish to die, people with disabilities will be encouraged and helped to kill themselves when they express the same feelings. And that is a double standard that we find discriminatory. Also, people who support this say that it's a choice, but we understand, based on our experience with discrimination, that the choice to die cannot be free as long as people with disabilities don't have the choice of where and how we live. And finally, the safeguards have not been effective in preventing people from being wrongfully killed in jurisdictions where assisted suicide and euthanasia are legal now. So we don't believe that the safeguards will be affected. The same safeguards that everybody's been using can possibly be effective because the whole point of the law is wrong. The whole point is that some people who want to die should be allowed to die, and some people who want to die shouldn't be allowed to die. And that the difference between those people is that they have a disability, or because that is ultimately the criteria it comes down to. The goal of our online discussion is for people with disabilities to have a place where our views are reflected. In the public debate on these issues, you'll hear from one side, which is the liberal people who say this is an individual choice and I want to have my choice, my body, blah, blah, blah. And on the other side, you'll often have conservatives and religious people who bring up moralistic or religious sanctity of life arguments. Our arguments are actually more progressive than the progressives because we look at these issues in light of the socioeconomic, political, and discrimination impact that they have on people, old, ill, and disabled people. Most people, when they become disabled, they don't think of themselves as a member of an oppressed group. But in fact, that is what happens when you become disabled, and people with disabilities know about that. We know about especially how we can be oppressed in the medical system, and these laws are usually run through the medical system, and that there's a lot of negative views about our lives in the medical system. So that, based on our experience with discrimination, based on our experience with the medical system, we have a pretty different point of view, and we wanted to offer a place for people with disabilities to talk about these issues. And there are several ways to participate. Probably the best and most effective ones are to go to YouTube and look for euthanasia and disability and do a search, and you'll find our chats online. You can go to our webpage, actually go to our Facebook page, and you'll see the links for today's chat. And you could also go to Google Hangouts on Air and look for our chat. It's live on Fridays. For the English chat, it's live on Friday afternoons at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. in the United States. So that's the best way to get in touch with us, to participate directly, and there's a way to submit questions. And finally, if you have questions or want more information about anything you hear during this online discussion, you can contact me, and you can either email me at info@tv-ndy.ca. You can also reach me at our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/toujours vivant, not dead yet. It's all one word. Sorry, I couldn't get TVNDY, it was already taken. Also, you can go to our our website, which is tvndy.ca, or you can email me. Yeah, email. Oh, Twitter was the other option, and that is @TVNDY. You can follow us on Twitter, and I tweet quite a bit. Okay, today's topics are Bill S-225 is introduced in the Canadian Senate, how bills are adopted in the Canadian Senate, because we want you to know how you can affect that process. Compassion and choices up to their old dirty tricks again. And for our commentary section, we're going to start a new feature that is probably going to repeat, called Radio Blah Blah, Radio Blah Blah. Same in French and English, and we'll get to that when we'll get to that at the end. Bill S-225 is introduced in the Canadian Senate. On Tuesday, December 2nd, Senators Larry Campbell, who was a Liberal, and Nancy Ruth, who was a Conservative, introduced Senate S-225 in the Canadian Senate. The bill is almost identical, but not quite, to Bill C-581, which was what is that word? Filed by Conservative Stephen Fletcher and NDP MP Manon Perrault earlier this spring. The bill would allow euthanasia and assisted suicide for people who are ill or who have disabilities. The bill, there's no requirement that the person be at or near the end of life. And the eligibility criteria are very, very loose for this bill. The bill fundamentally is designed to kill. It makes no allusion to alleviating suffering. Doesn't talk about that at all. It doesn't talk about palliative care. It doesn't, nothing. It doesn't even claim to be for people who are at the end of life, as I said. And it favors death over improving quality of life. So it's not just that it doesn't offer palliative care, it doesn't offer any other options for people. So the eligibility criteria are very broad, as I said. This bill would apply to people with disabilities who have intolerable physical or psychological suffering, or those who have weakening capacities, whether or not they're dying. So it's also for people who are ill, but the person doesn't have to have a severe illness. It just says disabilities, illnesses, and they have to meet those standards. So a person could have a disability that is not painful, but is exacerbating or getting worse, and that person decides they don't want to live, they would be eligible for assisted suicide. Similarly, if a person has pain, but they don't really want to have it treated in a particular way, they don't want to go for XYZ treatment, they can refuse treatment and have assisted suicide. So that's the way the bill is written. The bill doesn't deal with the constitutional problems raised by the fact that the health services funded by the state are selecting a particular segment of the population to be killed. So if we go back to the issue of suicide prevention, if you have a group of people who all want to die, this bill goes through that group and picks out certain people to say, you get to die, but these other people, they'll get suicide prevention treatment. We'll try to prevent them from dying, even to the point of putting them in a psychiatric hospital against their will to prevent them from dying. But you other people, we think it's okay that you die. And the eligibility for being in that group is that you have a disability or an illness and either have pain or degeneration of your condition. Okay, that's what this bill does. And it's basically weeding out certain people, and those are disabled people. So the person who wants to die does not have to have a pre-existing relationship with the doctor before making the request. So somebody can just come in off the street and say, hey doc, I want to die. The doctor gathers, it doesn't have to get much information. It has to do an exam, but it doesn't even say what kind of exam. Makes the decision and has few responsibilities thereafter. The documentation required of the doctor is minimal. A few forms, some notes in the file, as the law says, and a statistical report whose information would fill less than a single page. So what they want on the report is, you know, the name of the person, what their disability is, what their province is, and that's pretty much it. They don't want much information. And that's certainly not enough information to follow the progress of the program. There is no procedure for rejecting a request or for stopping the process if a problem is found after the forms have been signed. Okay, so usually if you're saying that, you know, somebody applies for a program, either they get in or they don't. But this law doesn't have any explanation of what happens if the person doesn't. So they're assuming that everybody who applies is going to get in. It's a little funny that way. And they don't talk about what happens if, say, all the forms are signed and then somebody comes up and says, hey, you know, this person, the person who signed on as the witness actually has a financial interest in this person's estate and has been really pushing that person to, you know, request assisted suicide, and that, you know, this relative has been abusing the person. There's no process for stopping this. It's not in the law. They're making all kinds of assumptions that are not legitimate. So there's it's not a very airtight seal. The safeguards are very weak. There's also no way for a doctor to refuse to kill the person or give assisted suicide if it goes against his or her personal beliefs. There's nothing to prevent a person who was deemed ineligible, assuming there's a way to do that, by the way, from finding another doctor who will approve the assisted suicide or euthanasia. This happens a lot in Washington and Oregon. It's called doctor shopping. And what happens is that people who, you know, if they go to their own doctor and their own doctor says, no, you're not eligible for this because, you know, you're, for whatever reason, you're not eligible. The person says, all right, well, and they go to another doctor and the doctor says, sure, no problem, I'll sign all the forms you want. So there's no protection for people who are being pressured by their relatives, but you know, one doctor finds that the situation is dangerous and won't sign the death warrant, but another doctor will because he doesn't care. So the method for administration of assisted suicide or euthanasia is not described at all. The bill lacks details that will have to be fleshed out during the regulatory process, which is less susceptible, it's less open to public scrutiny. When regulations are made, it's a lot, most of it is done, you know, in offices where professional bureaucrats write regulations, and you can file comments, but that those generally are not, you know, they can accept them or not, but there's no open discussion about it. So it's not clear how the doctors are going to do the deed, basically, and whether there's going to be any safeguards on that. The bill emphasizes protections for doctors, as in Section 2, and there's no protection or no procedure or sanction where when people are killed under suspicious circumstances. So we'll get to another issue like that, but you know, somebody, if there might be abuse in the family, but it isn't caught and somebody dies, there's no way to track back and deal with that. Many important terms are not defined, such as sound mind, competent, disability, and others. So these are pretty important terms that are the basis of the definition of who's eligible, but they're not defined. That's very, very poor lawmaking, in my opinion. No psychiatric exam is required to determine if the person has depression or some other treatable problem, like a medication reaction or a brain injury, or the person might have an interaction between drugs. Any number of things could be happening. The definition of voluntary euthanasia in the law is too broad, and it is not limited to acts performed by doctors. That's the primary problem with it. So it could be, the way the law is written, it could be that a non-doctor could perform voluntary euthanasia and wouldn't be punished for it. And then that slips into over into involuntary euthanasia, and then we are sliding down the hill. Doctors are required to inform the person of a limited list of options they have, but there's no obligation that the person receive the services that are on that list of options. So the doctor, for example, this doctor is supposed to tell the person, well, you have the alternative of having palliative care, but there's nothing that requires either the doctor arrange for that to happen or that the person receive palliative care. So it's pretty useless just to tell somebody about it, especially a person who's in a really bad situation. If the service isn't provided, it isn't of much use. Doctors, let's see, the articles aimed at protecting the person from witnesses who could exercise undue financial influence are not strict enough or clear enough to be effective. So there are some provisions, but they say, you know, a witness cannot be a blood relative or a spouse. Well, what about live-in partners? Or what about, you know, brothers-in-law? Or, you know, there are a number of other things. What they're trying to get at is that, you know, somebody who is has a financial interest. They say a person who has an interest in the estate. Well, people have other things of value that may not be in an estate, and if the person doesn't have a will, then there's not necessarily an estate, especially if the person's not dead. There may be trusts. It's just not well written to protect the people, basically. The bill doesn't require an autopsy to verify that the accuracy of the diagnosis in the first place. And this was especially important in the beginning, in the 1990s, when Jack Kevorkian was killing people. A bunch of people he killed, mostly women, by the way, were people who had just been diagnosed and didn't even know if they had, I mean, they were told that they had XYZ disease, but hadn't necessarily shown symptoms of being sick. And but they wanted and got killed by Kevorkian anyway, and some of them were shown to not have been sick. So that's a problem that happens in these situations. The section relating to personal information about those who have had assisted suicide or euthanasia it gathers very little information, and the information is held so closely that it will make studying the program and the effects on society impossible. It doesn't collect enough information. For example, if somebody was rejected, why they were rejected, how many people, the person, how many doctors a person consulted, all of those pieces of information that you need to know about the person, the trajectory from the decision to when it happened, and all those things are not recorded, but they're very important. And also, the records are pretty much sealed, and so it's going to be very difficult to study anything about what happens. Article 16 of the bill requires a maximum 5-year prison sentence for anyone who hides or destroys either a request for aid in dying or the revocation of a request. And that's important because if you hide or destroy the revocation, that means the person they're gonna go ahead and kill the person, which means that there's an unwanted death that happens. And 5 years isn't enough to punish, killing somebody who didn't want to die. And that's my opinion, but there you go. It fits with the fact that, like all these similar bills, the safeguards are placed in opposition to the interest of the person's expressed wish to die. And society is throwing its weight behind the person's wish, okay? So instead of, the person says, I want to die, and that's their wish, and society saying, yeah, we'll throw our weight behind your wish. And the protections are put up as roadblocks, and everybody says, no, we don't like these protections because they're preventing somebody from getting what they want. But in the situation of suicide prevention, society throws up a bunch of roadblocks to try to prevent people from being killed wrongfully. And I see we have a commenter here. Hello, Nicola. So Nicola has not, oh, he says hi. Hi, Nicola. So we will, the difference between when we're looking at suicide prevention and when we are looking at suicide, assisted suicide, is just that the person has an identified disability. If they have an identified disability, they fall into the assisted suicide category. And so instead of this society standing behind the protections, society is trying to push all the protections out of the way and make the person die as fast as possible. And that's why we believe it's discriminatory. Okay, so that's it for Senate Bill 225. It was just filed this week, so we will absolutely keep an eye on it. But for people in Canada, you can be in touch with the Senate directly to have your voice heard about this. And here's a little bit about how the process works in Canada in passing a law in the Senate. Oh, I didn't fix that. That's too bad. While bills can be introduced either in the Senate, in which case their number is preceded by the letter S, or in the House of Commons, in which case the number is preceded by a C for Commons, the Senate cannot initiate money bills. That's just a note. But since this isn't a money bill, it doesn't have anything to do with funding, it doesn't matter. So the Senate can introduce a bill. Bills can be introduced either by the government, i.e. a cabinet minister, or by a private member. And in this case, this is a private member's bill. So let's see, all bills must be considered and passed by both the Senate and the House of Commons before getting the royal assent and being adopted. So that's pretty standard in parliamentary governments. I have to explain this stuff because I came from the US and I didn't know any of this stuff. And I know that some people listening may be more familiar with the US system and less with the parliamentary system. So, okay, passing bills in the Senate. It's similar to passing them in the House, and there are 5 steps. The first is the first reading, where the Senate receives the bill and it's printed and circulated among the senators, so everybody gets a copy to read. This is an introductory proceeding in the Senate chamber and takes place without any debate or vote. The second reading is when the senators debate the idea of the bill in the chamber. So it's not the specifics of how it's going to happen. It's just the idea. Do we want to have assisted suicide? Basically, they're asking themselves, is this bill good policy? To help with this process, the Senate may refer the subject to a Senate committee for closer examination before voting or taking any further action on it. The committee stage, the committee can call people to come before and testify about the bill. They can invite cabinet ministers, government officials, experts, members of the public who have an interest in the bill to share information and perspectives in public hearings. Committee members can study the bill with this information clause by clause, section by section. Members of the committee may propose changes to the bill, known as amendments, during the committee stage. After it's completed the clause by clause analysis, and it's not necessarily changed, but they can change it, the committee adopts a report on the bill. The report will recommend to the Senate that the bill be either accepted as is, be accepted with amendments, or that it be rejected. So 3 choices: accepted as is, no changes; accepted with amendments; or rejected. Okay, so the committees often include some thoughts on the report include thoughts on the bill with this report that's sent back to the Senate. So the report stage is when the committee sends its report to the Senate, and whether it wants the bill to be adopted with amendments, or rejected. And let's see. If the committee's report recommends adopting the bill as it is, with no amendments, there is no report stage and the Senate goes directly to the 3rd reading. But if there are amendments suggested, then they have to go through that process in more detail. Again, clause by clause, adding the amendments, agreeing on the amendments. That's a pretty elaborate process. The 3rd reading is the final stage of debate in the chamber. Senators may propose further amendments at this stage before voting to pass or reject the bill. So if you're keeping track, the senators' first reading is they just get the bill printed out in hand. The second reading is they look at the basic idea of the bill and say, do we like it, do we not? So it's not even dealing with the individual sections of the bill. The third part is they're being given the whole bill of goods as finished, and they either have to say yes or no. oftentimes they don't look at it in detail. They'll just take the word of some, their party. They'll vote with their party. Sometimes their party will give them a free vote, but they may, generally their party will tell them how to vote. So unless they have been working in the committee on the bill, they may not have a lot of knowledge about what's happening. So that's part of our job, is to educate them, to show them that they should be interested in this, and then educate them. So that's a little bit about the process of passing a bill in the Senate. So, all right, Compassion and Choices, dirty trick. Compassion and Choices is a group that promotes assisted suicide, and they've been around for a long time. They had a different name. They used to be called the Hemlock Society, and they've changed their name several times to try to be more agreeable and less off-putting, to try to rebrand themselves. And so that's why it's been, it was a little hard for some people to keep track of them for a few years, because they changed their name. But they finally settled on Compassion and Choices. But this week I saw a video which described the experience of Katie Buck, who's a young woman who signed an online sympathy card for Brittany Maynard, who was an American woman who had brain cancer. Soon Ms. Buck started receiving emails from Compassion and Choices, also known as CNC. They're an assisted suicide advocacy group. Since Ms. Buck opposes assisted suicide, she wondered how her name had gotten on CNC's mailing list. In her video, Ms. Buck just stated that in signing the online sympathy card, her name had been placed on a petition to support assisted suicide and on CNC's database. She verified this by calling CNC's headquarters in Colorado. She rechecked the connection between the sympathy card and the petition by having her husband and a friend sign the card, and then called CNC to verify, yes, that their names and postal codes had been added to the petition list. And that petition list is given to organizations at the state level by their zip code. So when assisted suicide laws are introduced in a state, they will have names of people to contact to give money and to provide testimony and to go support assisted suicide. So from just signing a card to offer support to this woman who was sick, she all of a sudden, her name and postal code is on this list where they're asking for money and wanting her to go out and support assisted suicide, which is not part of her beliefs. So Not Dead Yet in the United States is expecting at least 16 assisted suicide bills to be filed in, bills to be filed in 16 states in next year, 2015. 1 million signatures on a petition could have, the goal of the card, the sympathy card, was to have 1 million signatures. Now we know that that goal wasn't about sympathy, it was about petition signatures. So they were asking for 1 million petition signatures, which I don't know if they got them, but probably because it was a big deal. And that 1 million signatures could have a major impact on legislators throughout the country who, even if those signatures were obtained fraudulently. So this is something we need to, talk about, get the word out, saying this is not appropriate. Now, I need to verify this because I've seen the video, but I don't have the skills, the computer skills, to verify that the site really did what it said it did, that the greeting card really didn't say that, there are pictures on the video, but I can't verify it myself. So That's why I'm being clear that this is from this woman. Okay, and last but not least, commentary, radio blah blah. Okay, my brother-in-law asked me when I was away for the holiday, why don't I do my online discussions like a sports talk show, loud, people yelling their opinions, that sort of thing. He reminded me that this is a very popular format and people tend to listen. And I thought, okay, why not? So, so this week, in our never-ending effort to entertain, to blow off steam, and to lower our standards so as to raise our ratings, we bring you Radio Blah Blah. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to talk about is suicide prevention or assisted suicide. Make up your frickin' minds. Look, we have supposedly this policy for suicide prevention, and it's a great idea. We try to prevent suicides of gay people, of Inuit, of widows where their husband just died, of middle-aged and elderly men who just retired and they don't see much in life that's left, and we try to prevent people's suicides. It's great, but how come that stops as soon as we get to somebody with a disability? And it's interesting because if you read the literature on suicide prevention, one of the most, they talk about risk factors. A big risk factor for suicidality is somebody who has a disease or a disability or a recent physical trauma. Well, that's a disability. So we know that developing a disability is a risk factor for suicidal behavior. But people who want assisted suicide say, no, they're not depressed, which is bullshit, okay? Bull pocky. And so we as a society need to decide we can have assisted suicide, but it needs to be for everybody, okay? So you got a 50-year-old girl whose boyfriend who just dumped her because he says she's fat and she's already got anorexia and because she won't sleep with him or whatever. Sure, assist her suicide. Why don't we? So you have some young transgender person who just got beat up because she went to a bar and somebody saw her and figured out that she was originally a man or pre-op, and a bunch of guys beat her up. That person gets really depressed and tries to commit suicide. If we want to give up on having, if we want to assist people to suicide, why don't we assist that person? Why don't we assist people who are drug addicts because they live in such horrible poverty and they were forced to go to residential schools when they were kids and they lost their language. And why aren't we giving assisted suicide to people like that? So we either have to give it to everybody or give it to nobody. But all this discrimination, you go over here, you go over here, that's crap. That's absolute crap. And we have to stop it. Because what we're doing is we're saying this group, society is saying this group is worthy to live and this other group is worthy to die. And that's it. This group who says they want to die, these suicidal people, we're going to keep them alive. This other group who say they want to die, we're not going to try to keep them alive. They can go off and we'll help them die. In fact, it's not even that we'll just let them, we'll help them, whereas, in fact, they don't need help. They can stop having medical treatment. They can, fasting to death has been a tradition for thousands of years in many you know, many religious practices and such. So it's not like nobody has ever done it. But we really have to make up our minds as a society. Is this what we want to do or not? Okay. My second bit of ranting and raving, come back here. Okay. My second bit of ranting and raving comes from Udo Schuklenk, who was a schmuck. He's an ethicist, and he just wrote an article where he's saying that disabled babies, somebody, presumably a non-disabled person, should do an assessment of their quality of life, and if their quality of life isn't going to be good enough, off with them. So to misquote or to borrow a quote from his article, does this knucklehead have the capacity to get his head out of his butt to an extent that it will allow him to stop treating people with disabilities like trash and not be a jerk? If we reached the conclusion that he would not, we would have reason to conclude that his life is not worth living. And that's what I have to say to Udo Schuklenk. Because I was one of those babies that was disabled. And, you know, you know, if somebody had that brilliant idea that my life wouldn't have had any quality, then I would be dead. So that's what I have to say to Udo Schuklenk. And finally, conflation and con jobs. Compassion and Choices has been a sleazy, obnoxious group for a long time. Whether they were called the Hemlock Society, whether it was Compassion and Dying, whether it was whatever. They've been jerks for a long time. And part of the reason that they're jerks is because they keep doing this little tap dance about whether they want assisted suicide for people with and without disabilities, or just people without disabilities, or with disabilities, you know. But really, if you look deep in their writings, if you listen to what they say when they're in their own meetings by themselves, they want people with disabilities to be dead. You know, that we're in the group. It's not just people at the end of life. They use that as an excuse and as a shield to prevent people from, you know, of thinking badly of them. They're saying, oh no, these people aren't suicidal, they're already dying. This isn't suicide. This is the person is already dying. Well, that's not true. It's just not true. And so that's how they try to avoid the issue that this is suicide or whatever. So if you look deep into what they write and what they write privately and where they're pushing, that's what you'll find, is that people are really pushing for people who are not capable of making decisions for themselves, for people who are under 18, children, like in Belgium. They're pushing for people with disabilities, who are not at the end of life, to be euthanized and allowed assisted suicide. In the US, they try to stick pretty close to this idea of assisted suicide / 6 months to live. But we all know, everyone with a disability knows somebody who has outlived their prognosis, if they haven't themselves, outlived a 6 month prognosis. And so this whole idea of 6 months to live is bull crap. And so there. That's my little rant for the day. That is our radio blah blah entertainment section. This is not about providing information. This is about entertaining, or at least letting me rant for a few minutes. So in order to learn to be in touch with us, you can email me at info@tv-ndy.org. You can follow me on Twitter at TVNDY. You can, excuse me, what else can you do? You can go to our website, tvndy.ca, or you can go to our Facebook page at facebook.com/toujours vivant, not dead yet. Thank you very much for joining me. If you want to watch old online discussions, you can go to my YouTube channel or search YouTube Disability Euthanasia, and you will find our discussions. We've been doing them since September of 2013, so we have plenty in the can, and we try to cover a wide variety of subjects, but all of which relate back to this debate about assisted suicide as it relates to people with disabilities. So we will be having probably one more online discussion before I break for the holidays. That will be next week. That will be the 12th of December, 12/12. And after that, I'll take a break for the holidays. So I look forward to being with you next week and wish you a wonderful week. Thank you very much for joining us. Take care. Goodbye.